As dawn breaks over the busy hospital, Nurse Zuri Okoro, a dedicated black nurse, arrives with her usual warmth and compassion, ready for another day. But everything changes when Dr. Alistair Hawke, a respected yet arrogant surgeon, strides in and harshly criticizes her in front of a patient. The tension rises as Zuri stands there humiliated, her dignity at stake. They were unaware that the quiet patient watching holds a secret that could change everything. This moment will spark a powerful fight for justice and respect that no one saw coming. Join us on this gripping journey, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to keep these thought-provoking stories alive. The early morning sunlight barely touched the hospital windows as Nurse Zuri Okoro moved swiftly through the halls. The hospital was just beginning to come to life, but Zuri was already fully in the rhythm of her shift. As usual, her face carried a warm smile, and her gentle approach brought comfort to the patients she cared for. Zuri had always prided herself on being a professional, compassionate nurse, but today would test her in ways she hadn't expected. As she checked the vitals of her new patient, Judge Elias Mercer, she sensed a calmness in the air despite the usual busyness of the hospital. Judge Mercer, an older man, rested quietly in his bed, but there was something dignified about him. Though he hadn't spoken much, his sharp eyes suggested he was not someone easily overlooked. Zuri adjusted his pillow, ensuring he was comfortable before she prepared to continue her rounds. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open with a loud bang. Dr. Alistair Hawke, a surgeon known for his arrogance, strode in like he owned the place. His white coat swished dramatically behind him, and his expression was one of impatience and disdain. Zuri immediately felt the tension rise, as it always did when he entered the room. She braced herself for the worst. Dr. Hawke barely glanced at Judge Mercer before his piercing gaze locked onto Zuri. "What are you doing in here, nurse?" he demanded. His voice dripped with disdain, as though the very sight of her annoyed him. "I told you this patient needs to be prepped for surgery, not wasting time with your—" He gestured dismissively toward her hands. "Routine checks." Zuri straightened her back, her heartbeat quickening, but her voice steady. "I was following the proper procedures, doctor." His vitals weren't stable yet. "Of course you would think that," Dr. Hawke interrupted, his tone laced with something sharper than annoyance. It was a tone Zuri recognized all too well, always trying to slow things down with your overly cautious approach. "This is a hospital, not a community clinic." Zuri felt the sting of his words. It wasn't just about the procedure. There was something more venomous in his voice, something she had faced before. Dr. Hawke's eyes were cold, filled with a quiet contempt that Zuri knew came not just from his arrogance, but from the deep prejudices he carried with him. He saw her not just as a nurse, but as a black woman in a position he believed she didn't deserve. Judge Mercer remained quiet, observing the exchange with careful eyes, but Zuri could feel his presence as a witness. Dr. Hawke took a step closer, his voice lowering but still biting. "It's people like you who hold this place back, always thinking you know better than the doctors. If you don't step up, maybe you should find work that's more suited for you." His eyes lingered on her dark skin for a moment, the insult clear even without him saying it directly. Zuri's stomach turned, but she kept her composure. She had worked too hard to let his words break her. "I'm here to do my job and to make sure the patients are cared for properly," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I don't cut corners when it comes to their safety." Dr. Hawke sneered, clearly unimpressed. "That's rich coming from you," he spat. "I don't need a lecture from a nurse who only got here because of some diversity hire quota. You're here to follow instructions, not question them. Do your job, or I'll find someone who can." The racial undertones of his comment hung heavily in the air. Zuri's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let his words show their impact. She had heard these things before, whispers behind her back, assumptions about why she was there, about her abilities. But hearing them out loud from Dr. Hawke in front of a patient made her blood boil. Before she could respond, Judge Mercer spoke up, his voice cutting through the thick tension in the room. "Doctor, do you know who I am?" Dr. Hawke, still focused on Zuri, barely acknowledged the question. "It doesn't matter who you are, sir," he said dismissively, his irritation showing. "What matters is that we get you prepped for surgery as quickly as possible, despite this nurse's incompetence." Zuri couldn't believe what she was hearing, but she stayed silent, watching as Judge Mercer slowly sat up in his bed. The room seemed to still as the elderly man's sharp gaze met Dr. Hawke's. "It does matter," Judge Mercer said, his voice now commanding attention. "You see, I'm Judge Elias Mercer, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." The color drained from Dr. Hawke's face. His mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came out. Zuri stood still, her eyes widening as she realized the full weight of what was happening. Judge Mercer continued, his voice calm but firm. "I've spent my life fighting for justice and equality, and I won't stand by while I witness this kind of behavior. Your treatment of Nurse Okoro isn't just unprofessional, it's unacceptable." Dr. Hawke, visibly shaken, tried to regain his composure. I didn't mean," he stammered, but Judge Mercer cut him off. "You did mean it," Judge Mercer said sternly. "And that's the problem. I've seen men like you before, arrogant, dismissive, thinking they're above others because of their status. But let me make this clear. No one is above respect, especially in a place meant to heal." Zuri felt a surge of emotion. For so long, she had endured these quiet indignities, biting her tongue, trying to stay professional. But now, here was someone with real power, standing up for her, calling out the very prejudice she had faced for years. Dr. Hawke stood frozen, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. He looked between Zuri and Judge Mercer, his arrogance crumbling as the weight of his actions sank in. Dr. Hawke's arrogance had vanished, replaced by a pale, trembling unease. The room felt suffocatingly silent, save for the distant hum of the hospital outside the door. Zuri stood tall, her heart pounding, but her expression unwavering. She couldn't believe how quickly the tables had turned. Dr. Hawke, who just moments ago had been so certain of his superiority, was now visibly shaken. "I had no idea," Dr. Hawke finally muttered, his voice barely audible. "Your Honor, if I had known..." Judge Mercer raised a hand, cutting him off. "That's precisely the problem, Doctor," he said firmly. "You think that respect should only be given to those you deem important. But every human being, regardless of their title or position, deserves dignity. And as a surgeon, you hold lives in your hands. With that power comes responsibility, not just to your patients, but to your colleagues as well." Zuri felt a mix of emotions wash over her, relief, validation, but also a sense of responsibility. This moment was more than just about Dr. Hawke's behavior toward her. It was about the countless other nurses, staff members, and even patients who had been treated unfairly, their worth dismissed by someone like him. Dr. Hawke's mouth opened, but no words came out. His hands fidgeted at his sides as he struggled to maintain composure. Judge Mercer, however, remained calm, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the room. "I'll be speaking with the hospital board about this," Judge Mercer added, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "This institution must ensure that such treatment does not continue. If this is how you treat your staff, then changes must be made, starting with you." Zuri glanced at Dr. Hawke. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. The confident, condescending man who had strutted into the room moments ago was now a shell of that arrogance, stripped bare before both Zuri and the Chief Justice. Just as Judge Mercer was about to speak further, the door creaked open again. Two senior hospital administrators entered, Mr. Charles Denton, the hospital's chief of staff, and Ms. Linda Hastings, the director of human resources. Both of them looked serious, having clearly been informed by Judge Mercer's assistant that there was a significant matter to address. Mr. Denton spoke first, his voice low but firm. "Dr. Hawke, we've been informed of an incident involving you and Nurse Okoro." His gaze shifted between Dr. Hawke and Zuri before he settled on the visibly shaken doctor. "We need to discuss this matter further, in private." Dr. Hawke, his face now a deep shade of crimson, looked down, avoiding Zuri's eyes. His authority had been completely stripped away in that moment. Miss Hastings stepped forward, addressing Zuri with a warm but serious tone. "Nurse Okoro, we would like to get a full account of what happened here. Please know that your experience is taken very seriously, and any concerns you have will be addressed." Zuri nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Thank you, Miss Hastings," she said. "I've already given my account to Judge Mercer, but I'm happy to provide more details if needed." Judge Mercer stood from the bed, his towering presence commanding the room. "I believe it's important for everyone to understand that this is not just about this incident. It's about the culture of the hospital, the lack of respect shown to staff members like Nurse Okoro, and how that behavior trickles down. This must change. Mr. Denton nodded, clearly taking the Chief Justice's words to heart. We will ensure that this is thoroughly investigated. Dr. Hawke, you'll need to come with us for further questioning. Dr. Hawke, his face drained of color, nodded silently. He had no choice. As he turned to leave, his eyes briefly met Zuri's. For a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say something, to apologize perhaps, or to offer some kind of justification for his behavior, but no words came. Instead, he simply followed the administrators out of the room, his once mighty presence reduced to nothing. Hours passed after the confrontation, and Zuri found herself reflecting on what had happened. Though the incident had shaken her, it also sparked something deep within, a determination to make sure that what she experienced wasn't swept under the rug. But as the day went on, Zuri couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was just the beginning. Whispers among the hospital staff suggested that Dr. Hawke wasn't the only one with discriminatory attitudes. Several colleagues shared their own stories of being mistreated, of racial bias, unfair evaluations, and being overlooked for promotions. It became clear to Zuri that Dr. Hawke's behavior was part of a much larger problem. The hospital had a deeper, more insidious culture of prejudice that had gone unchallenged for too long. Zuri's thoughts were interrupted when she received an unexpected visitor later that evening, Judge Mercer. He had requested to see her privately, and she felt a rush of gratitude when she saw his calm, reassuring presence at the door. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice kind. "Of course," Zuri said, gesturing toward a chair. "Please have a seat." Judge Mercer sat down, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I wanted to thank you, Nurse Okoro," he began. "Not just for your care earlier, but for the way you handled yourself during that confrontation. You were professional, composed, and more importantly, you showed grace in the face of a very ugly situation." Zuri smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said softly. "But I was just doing what I had to. I'm not the only one who's faced this kind of treatment." Judge Mercer nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I know. That's why I want to help. The way Dr. Hawke treated you, the way this hospital allows certain behaviors to go unchecked, it's part of a larger issue. Prejudice, discrimination, and corruption run deep here. I've seen it before in other places, but this time, I think we can do something about it." Zuri's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I've already begun speaking with some of the board members," Judge Mercer said. "And I have reason to believe that Dr. Hawke's behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. There are people in this hospital's administration who are more interested in maintaining their power and status than in creating a fair and equitable environment. I suspect that some of them are involved in activities that are not only unethical, but illegal." Zuri felt a chill run down her spine. "Illegal? Like what?" Judge Mercer's expression grew more serious. "Misuse of hospital funds, corruption in the hiring and promotion processes, cover-ups of medical mistakes. The kind of things that get swept under the rug unless someone has the courage to expose them." Zuri's mind raced. She had always known that there were problems in the hospital, but she had never imagined that it went this deep. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety building within her. "I'm going to need your help, Zuri," Judge Mercer said firmly. "You have the respect of your colleagues, and I have the legal expertise. Together, we can gather the evidence we need to bring this corruption to light. But it won't be easy. People will try to stop us. They'll try to discredit you, just like Dr. Hawke tried to do today. But if we stand together, we can expose the truth." Zuri's life was about to take a dramatic turn. What began as a humiliating confrontation had now evolved into a much larger fight for justice. Together with Judge Mercer, Zuri was about to step into a dangerous battle against the very institution she had dedicated her career to. But she knew deep down that this was her calling, to fight not only for herself, but for all those who had been silenced for too long. As Zuri prepared for the journey ahead, she couldn't help but wonder, just how far did the corruption go? And how many more secrets were hiding behind the hospital's polished exterior? The storm was only just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind for Zuri. What had started as a personal confrontation with Dr. Hawke had spiraled into a larger cause, a mission to expose the corruption and racism entrenched in the hospital's culture. Zuri found herself meeting quietly with Judge Mercer in his private chambers, planning their strategy. Every time she entered his room, it felt like stepping into a hidden world where their discussions carried immense weight. This won't be easy, Judge Mercer had warned during one of their evening talks. The people involved in this will stop at nothing to protect their interests. They've hidden their tracks well, and they've made sure to instill fear among the staff. Zuri nodded, her face set in determination. I'm ready. If this place doesn't change, it's not just me. It's every nurse, every patient who will continue to suffer. I won't let that happen. Judge Mercer smiled faintly, admiring her courage. Good, but we need evidence, something undeniable. I've been hearing whispers from my contacts in the legal world about financial irregularities, funds that are meant for patient care being redirected into private accounts. If we can get our hands on those records, we'll have the leverage we need. Zuri leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Do you know where to start? There's one person who might be able to help, Judge Mercer said. A whistleblower within the administration. They've been passing information to some colleagues about the misuse of hospital resources. We need to find them and convince them to come forward. Later that week, Zuri found herself in a dimly lit parking garage. The cold concrete walls echoed with every footstep as she waited for her contact. Judge Mercer had arranged for her to meet the whistleblower, an administrator who had worked in the hospital's finance department for over a decade. This person had seen the corruption firsthand, but had remained silent, fearing retribution. Zuri's nerves were on edge. She wasn't used to this kind of undercover work. Her career had been built on caring for patients, not unraveling conspiracies. But she knew she had to remain focused. A shadow appeared at the entrance to the garage. Zuri tensed, but kept her posture calm. As the figure approached, she saw it was a middle-aged woman, her face drawn with worry. She wore a long coat, and her eyes darted around, as if she feared being watched. You must be Nurse Okoro, the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. Izzy replied, and you must be the one who's been helping us. The woman nodded, glancing over her shoulder nervously. I don't have much time. If they find out I've been talking, I'll lose everything. My job, my career, maybe even worse. You're safe with me, Zuri assured her. Judge Mercer and I are working to expose what's happening. But we need your help. We need proof. The woman hesitated for a moment before handing Zuri a small flash drive. This is all I could get. It's financial records, hospital budgets, expense reports, transfers that don't add up. It shows where the money's going. And trust me, it's not where it's supposed to. Zuri took the drive, her heart racing. This is exactly what we need. Thank you. Before the woman could respond, there was a sudden screech of tires from across the garage. Zuri's head snapped toward the sound, and her blood ran cold. A dark sedan was speeding toward them, its headlights cutting through the gloom. They found us, the woman gasped, panic flooding her face. Run, Zuri shouted, grabbing the woman's arm and pulling her toward the exit. The two women sprinted through the garage, their footsteps echoing loudly as the car roared closer. Zuri could feel her heart pounding in her ears, fear driving her forward. The sedan screeched to a halt, and the doors flew open. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their faces obscured by shadows. Zuri didn't have time to get a good look at them. Her focus was on getting the whistleblower to safety. This way, Zuri called, leading the woman toward a narrow alley that led out of the garage. The men gave chase, their footsteps heavy behind them. Zuri's mind raced. If they were caught, everything would be over. She had to protect the whistleblower and get the evidence to Judge Mercer. As they reached the alley's end, Zuri spotted a crowded street just beyond. They would be safer in the open, among people. She pushed herself harder, urging the woman to keep up. Finally, they burst out onto the busy sidewalk. The noise of the city engulfed them, and Zuri glanced back. The men had stopped at the edge of the alley, watching from the shadows, clearly unwilling to follow them into the crowd. For now, they were safe. Breathing heavily, Zuri turned to the whistleblower. Are you okay? The woman nodded, though her face was pale. We can't keep meeting like this, she said shakily. They'll keep coming after us. Zuri squeezed her arm reassuringly. Don't worry, Judge Mercer and I will protect you. We're getting closer to the truth. Later that evening, Zuri met with Judge Mercer again, this time in the safety of his chambers. She handed him the flash drive, her mind still reeling from the close call in the parking garage. "They're on to us," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "But we got the evidence." Judge Mercer plugged the drive into his laptop, his expression grim as he scanned the files. "This is more than enough," he murmured, his brow furrowing as he clicked through the data. "These transfers, they're funneling money into offshore accounts, millions of dollars meant for patient care." Zuri felt a surge of anger. How could they do this? People's lives are at stake, and they're stealing from them. "Greed knows no bounds," Judge Mercer said, shaking his head. "But now we have what we need. We'll take this to the hospital board and the authorities. This ends here." The next day, the hospital board called an emergency meeting. Zuri, Judge Mercer, and the whistleblower were present, along with several key administrators. The tension in the room was palpable as they prepared to reveal the truth. Judge Mercer stood at the head of the table, his voice firm as he presented the evidence. "These documents show a clear pattern of financial misconduct. Funds meant for patient care have been diverted into private accounts, and certain individuals within this hospital's leadership have been directly involved." The board members exchanged shocked glances, some whispering among themselves. One of the senior administrators, a man named Mr. Rawlings, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "This is outrageous," Rawlings sputtered. "There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," Judge Mercer said sharply, "and the people responsible will be held accountable." As the board deliberated, Zuri couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The fight wasn't over yet, but they had taken a critical step toward justice. The corrupt officials would be removed, and the hospital would begin to heal. But as she glanced at Dr. Hawke, who sat quietly at the back of the room, Zuri knew there was still work to be done. Hawke had been a symptom of a larger problem, but now, with the hospital under new leadership, perhaps even he could change. In the weeks that followed, the hospital underwent a transformation. The corrupt officials were ousted, and a new leadership team took charge, committed to restoring integrity and fairness. Zuri was promoted to a leadership role where she could continue advocating for her colleagues and patients. Dr. Hawke, humbled by the experience, approached Zuri one day, offering a sincere apology for his past behavior. "I was wrong," he said, his voice quiet but earnest. "I've been blind to my own prejudice, and I'm sorry. I want to make things right." Zuri, though still wary, saw the sincerity in his eyes. "It's not just about words, Dr. Hawke. It's about actions. If you truly want to change, you'll need to prove it." And so the hospital began to rebuild itself from the inside out, guided by a new sense of purpose. Zuri, Judge Mercer, and the whistleblower had sparked a movement, one that would ensure the hospital remained a place of healing, compassion, and justice for all. Years later, Zuri looked back on the journey with pride. The hospital had become a beacon of hope, its transformation a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Judge Mercer's legacy lived on, and Zuri's story became an inspiration to all who believed in the fight for what is right. Dr. Hawke's transformation was just the beginning, but deeper questions remained. How many others harbored the same hidden prejudices? How often do the silent witnesses allow such moments to pass unchallenged? What will it take for true equality and respect to be a reality, not just in hospitals, but in every corner of society? Now, it's your turn. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe people can truly change after being confronted with their biases? What would you have done if you were in Zuri's place? Share your opinions and join the conversation in the comments below. Let's keep this important dialogue going. Thank you for watching.